All right, we're here to cover a segment on the WIRDARD Principle today. That's the comedy recycling theory's exclusive principle. When in Rome, do as Romans do. And it talks about how whenever we measure light speed on Earth, that we're always measuring it either after it's passed through a stationary piece of glass with respect to us, or we pass it through like a window in a vacuum chamber, but that the light has passed through a stationary piece of glass, and that the comedy recycling theory, the WIRDARD hypothesis, is that that is the reason that we never measure an actual change in light speed. Not that light never changes its speed, but it's an artifact of the way we measure the light speed. We're always measuring it after it's exited through a piece of glass that's not moving with respect to us, and that light, being the instantaneous WIMP or the instantaneous Roman whatever, doing what everything else does, in that conforming itself to like whatever speed it would have with respect to a piece of glass, once it emerges from that piece of glass, that it has no memory of what higher speed it might have had before that, but it's renormalized. It's like taking an absolute value function, a thing that gives you an absolute value for a number, whether it's positive or negative, and if you look at that absolute value function, you would only get positive numbers coming out of it, regardless whether you have a positive or a negative input. It's somewhat similar to that principle, but that's what the comedy recycling theory says, that because of the nature of light, that once we take whatever light speed actually was before we measure it, you run it through, let's say, like a vacuum chamber window, you run it through a piece of glass, a mirror, something that's not moving with respect to us, and then measure the light speed after that, that we always measure light speed as being the same. Well, the comedy recycling theory says that it's not that light speed never changes, it's that the light speed, once it emerges from that piece of glass, from that mirror, has been renormalized with respect to us, and that's the hidden bias in all the experiments. That's the real reason that we never measure the speed of light as changing. Even though we know certain sources will actually move with respect to us, and Einstein was of course saying that, well, it's because, you know, light has the same speed whichever reference frame you're in. But the comedy recycling theory is saying, well, maybe it's an artifact of the way we're actually doing the experiment. It's a way that we're actually measuring that light speed, not that the light speed is never any different. Again, can we prove that? Can we find a demonstration? I would like to see some stroboscopic chopping of light speed, like in a vacuum chamber or whatever, where we're not running it through a glass window or plastic window first, or transparent window of some kind or another, and try to measure, let's say, like a moving beam of gas emitting a laser beam, and measure it in the vacuum chamber before we actually run it through a mirror, reflect it off something, or measure it outside of that vacuum chamber through a clear glass window or quartz window or whatever type of window you measure it through. The comedy recycling theory hypothesis is that we would actually measure that light speed as being different if we could measure it without running it through a piece of glass that's fixed with respect to us. But that piece of glass that's fixed with respect to us renormalizes the value of the speed of light after light either bounces off it or passes through it, and that's the real reason that we never measure a change in the speed of light. Just a built-in bias in the way that we perform the measurement, not a built-in bias that light always has a constant speed. Can we prove it? Can we demonstrate it? I don't know, but that's the hypothesis. That's what I'd like to try to test out. That's what I would like people out there to start thinking of and say, is it possible that we've always assumed that light speed is the same because everybody measures it the same, but is the reason they measure it because it really is the same, or is it an artifact of measuring it because we always pass the value of whatever moving light it was through a fixed piece of glass with respect to us, and then after the light emerges from that, that it's been renormalized, and that it's then non-moving with respect to us, and we always measure it in a reference frame where it's not moving with respect to us. So that should give you something to think about, something that I don't know that many people out there have ever thought of or ever considered as a principle. And that was the WIRDARD hypothesis in a nutshell. A very simple thing. When in Rome, do as Romans do, and that's what I'm claiming that light does, that once it renormalizes itself to the speed of glass, that it has a characteristic speed, whether it's in air, in glass, in carbon dioxide, in oxygen, and nitrogen. They're all characteristic speeds that light will take on. They're always less than they are in a vacuum, but that light has a characteristic speed. But that once light reemerges from something like that, is it renormalized after it's done that? That does light have any memory? Oh, I used to be going this speed, but has it been reconformed or put back, once it's emerged from a piece of glass that's not moving with respect to us, that light then has lost all memory. Oh, I used to be going a lot faster, but that it's been renormalized, and that's the real reason that we always measure the speed of light as the same value. Something new to think of from the comedy recycling theory. Again, it either does this or it does not, but that's something new to think of, something new to test, something new that I know of. I haven't heard anybody else suggest that principle before. I haven't heard anybody else suggest that argument before, that may be part of the real reason that we don't measure the speed of light as changing. And there may be ways of designing experiments where we can actually encounter that difference once we know or suspect that light is being automatically renormalized by, again, passing through either a stationary piece of glass or reflecting off a piece of glass that's not moving with respect to us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for paying attention. Again, you can read more at the Comedy Recycling Theory, www.cr-theory.org.